we are going to talk about the position of not free will. This position has been recently, and not so much recently, but anyway, come up by one of the greatest scientists that we have nowadays, still living, primatologist, Robert Sapolsky. Sapolsky has written extensively on baboons, male because they're less aggressive than female baboons. There's a bunch of research out there, especially when concerns stress and how zebras, for instance, do not get ulcers. I think it was him that wrote that, how zebras do not get ulcers whereas we do. So stress in animals and stress in humans. But the position, which is not, I should say, something extremely, disaligned, it is heavily disaligned with traditional philosophical and legislative, if you like, perspective on human beings, their willingness and their action. But it's not disaligned within the context of the greatest scientists of today's. That's because many believe that actually we are not the ones who decide for ourselves. I know what you're thinking, so who decides? Well, let's go back for a second. If I go and buy an ice cream and eat the ice cream, right? Up until Freud, I would tell you that that was my deliberate decision. And my being, my head, my mind thought about the ice cream. Some would say I imagined the ice cream. I imagined to eat the ice cream to relieve myself from this hot weather, for instance. And that is totally my choice. I could buy the ice cream and eat it, or not, and that again would be part of my choice. I buy and eat the ice cream, somebody else would not buy and eat the ice cream. Why? They don't like it, they're not interested, they're okay, they don't feel so hot, a bunch of different reasons, right? Regardless of the motivations, though, this is not something that I feel forced to do, right? Whether or not I do buy an ice cream is in the end result of my free will. Then it arrived Freud. And when Freud arrived, told me and us all like a whole different story about why I was buying the ice cream. According to Freud, that was not necessarily the result of my deliberate decision to buy and eat an ice cream, but it was something else. It had to do with my desires, and some of my most profound desires would be also not either discovered or not easily accessible by me, because they would be hiding in a sort of region of my mind to which I would not have access to. And maybe if I did have access, it would be somehow in the form of dreams, right? So maybe today I'm gonna go and buy the ice cream because last night I dreamt about a giant monster, and then giant monster has the shape of an ice cream. And now today it's hot and I feel like I do want an ice cream, but that I feel I want comes from a deep desire that I have buried maybe for the last week or so, and that has made me progressively think about ice cream. So my action, that of buying and eating ice cream, is eventually dictated by my desires, and some of my desires are immediately there, available to me. Like I see something that I like and I'm like, oh, that's really nice, you know, and innately I almost have desire to buy it, to touch it, to see the material or something. So there's that part. Some of the most profound desires might be hidden. For instance, usually that happens very clearly and very blatantly when somebody has undergone trauma, right? Because what trauma does is shut the body and the mind, and the communication between the body and the mind in a way that, there are forms of detachment from not just what happened, but from the world itself, from participating to the world. Anyway, without going too much into there, let's go back to Sapolsky. Sapolsky is a primatologist, and is somebody who has studied not only biology but the behavior, right? And as much as behavior can be sort of changed and modified, and I would argue the point that pain is undoubtedly one of the greatest motivator. Like nobody really feels pushed. I mean, very few people do, but in general, like the biggest push for a change in behavior would be pain. A lot of pain, not too much, but like enough pain so you could be motivated to change perspective or to change a behavior in regard to something. Anyway, so even though some behaviors might be corrected, and might be corrected not because necessarily there's a better version, but there's a better version for ourselves out there, go ahead and sort of suppressing the original first response is immensely difficult, because any sort of behavior is not just a habit, not just like an entrenched habit, but it's deeply entrenched and linked with emotional responses. And somehow those emotional responses are something that we do not control. Those emotional responses depend, a lot of them, on the childhood we have had, on the way our emotions were wired. Can we change them? Yes, of course we can. Well, some of them we can, right? With an incredible effort usually, right? Because the more entrenched they are, those responses, the more difficult it is to change them. So when we look at these videos, or when I look at those videos, they go like, it's easy, you need to pick an habit, right? But it's not just about picking the habit. That's why so many people have sort of a certain degree of dysfunction anyway in the level of productivity, if you want to put it like that, is because not every single one of us perceives the world in the same terms. And here, perceiving the world is absolutely crucial, right? Because it depends massively upon the perception of the world that you have, how you're going to act in that world. And so if though that perception does not strictly depend on us, then Sapolsky concludes we do not also have control over our actions. Now, it's also good to keep in mind that theoretically out there, like up in the air, in the sky, probably next to the moral as delineated by Kant, we should think that there is a concept of personal agency, that I have to hold myself and others responsible for their action and myself for my action. But me doing that is a tool that allows me to be responsible. Is certainly true on legal terms, but it's not entirely the reality of my biology, and it's not mine but human beings' biology. That's because simply a bunch of mechanisms wire us one way or another basically since birth, and then to go ahead and inhibit, suppress certain types of behavior so that the original emotional and behavioral response is suppressed and substituted with something else. It's an extremely complicated thing to do. And even if you just don't suppress it but substitute it, sometimes the two responses cannot coexist together. So you'll see somebody struggling, in making a decision or in behaving coherently, which is something we do hold dear, right? Like the fact that we are coherent being, right? Otherwise we look like actually more crazy than what we are. So Sapolsky said there's no free will. It's all about, your mechanisms, your bodily mechanisms, and most of all, your prefrontal cortex. prefrontal cortex, and we have seen this like with the neuroscientific studies, Antonio Damasio and many others, but Damasio is the one that probably I know better, and the studies on Phineas Gage, on this man who had a metal rod literally transpassing his skull, making him blind, but also what that did, blind at least from one eye, but what that did is also to change completely Phineas Gage's behavior. This was a man that was like a sort of average in his behavior, and he became restless. He became he started playing in especially like hazard games. He began to swear a lot, to be disrespectful, not to go to church, to insult people randomly, right? That's because you have a region, we'll have a region in our brain which is exactly like in the frontal part of our brain, which is frontal cortex, and when that gets damaged, that is it, like pretty much that is it, because that is what allows you to have any form of social control, right? So that's why, for instance, when you have less sugar, since the reserves of sugars are next to that area, when you have less sugar in your body, so for instance when you're dieting, right, you become more aggressive because that area has less access to an important resource that allows you to moderate your behavior, modulate it in a way that you look less aggressive. But anyway, the whole point of this is a frontal cortex, right? And when that gets damaged, that's pretty much the end, because frontal cortex allows human beings to act right, to do the right thing despite everything, right? And in order to do that, that requires, you know, to function properly. And what researchers have demonstrated is, for instance, that at least 25% of the people on death row have suffered concussions, repeated concussions that, for instance, have damaged their prefrontal cortex. So it's hard to push forward the theory that you do have free will. In reality, you tend not to have so much free will, right? And even when you think that you do have it, so you have to be careful about like what actually would happen if I lose it, if I have from now on repeated concussions, right? Would I want to live in a justice system like the one that I have, or would I want it to be different? Would I want my justice system to understand that even though I made some decisions, a lot of the components that determined my decisions perhaps did not really depend on me. Anyway, that's food for thoughts. So I am looking forward to hearing your comments, to reading your comments, and if you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll talk next time in a new episode. Bye!